P, so I got a lot of inquiries in regards to what I thought about the Dr. Umar Johnson interview on the Roland Martin show. So I wanted to take a moment to share my perspective on that. And before I share my perspective on the interview, I just wanted to say that there's a lot of things that I agree with that Dr. Umar Johnson and Roland Martin say, but then there's also a lot of things that I disagree with that Dr. Umar Johnson and Roland Martin say. So my perspective is not in support of Dr. Umar Johnson or Roland Martin. I'm just sharing what I saw as an outside observer. And one of the first things I noticed that was a little suspicious, I thought, is when Roland Martin opened up the interview with his talking points about the questioning of Dr. Umar Johnson's credentials. The accompanying footage that he used off of Dr. Umar Johnson's Breakfast Club interview had nothing to do with his credentials. And to me, it makes sense that if I'm talking about a person's performance on a basketball court, then if that is my initial talking points, then I'm going to use footage of this person on the court, their highlights and everything else. But the fact that Roland Martin didn't use the accompanying footage that showed Dr. Umar Johnson's discussion about his credentials on the Breakfast Club, he chose to use other footage. That's no different than if I'm talking about a person's credentials on a basketball court and then the footage that I use is this person at the supermarket picking up fruit or walking down the street feeding ducks or something. You would kind of look at it like, why would they use that kind of footage when it should be aligned with their talking points? That was the first flag that I saw that went up. And the footage that Roland Martin used to accompany his talking points was some of the commentary Dr. Umar Johnson made on the Breakfast Club that would be considered militant or inflammatory or whatever. So I knew that right from the onset, he wanted to create drama. He wanted to create the type of environment where it was going to be a lively discussion and oftentimes adversarial. So from there, I like the way that Dr. Umar Johnson handled the first initial questions that Roland Martin posed to him in regards to his credentials, as well as his ancestry linked to Frederick Douglass. Now, here's where I saw the interview go downhill, and there was a point of contention that was used to make it go downhill. And that is when Dr. Umar Johnson started to discuss interracial relationships. And I think his points were good in terms of discussing his reasoning of why he promotes the stability of black families and being able to maintain our integrity as far as our families being the seminal units of building strong communities. I like those particular points, but the point of contention, or that was used to stir the pot and to create argument, is when Dr. Umar Johnson said that when there's a black man that, and I'm paraphrasing it, that chooses a woman that is not of African descent, then he's going to have a difficult time getting any kind of respect from him. So when he made that initial statement, that was used as the point of contention to create argument. And if you notice, the whole interview was based primarily around that particular personal feeling. It wasn't about facts. It wasn't about anything else. But that is where the argument actually started. And then it went on to the point where there was an instance where one of the panelists called Dr. Umar Johnson a liar. And in response to being called a liar, Dr. Umar Johnson called him a coon. I didn't like how Roland Martin didn't check both of them about the name calling. That should be inappropriate and unacceptable across the board. But Roland Martin didn't do that. He only checked Dr. Umar Johnson about calling him a coon, but he did not check this other dude about calling him a liar. That was unfair and it was biased, and it gave me a sense of what Roland Martin's intention really was with setting up that type of interview. And it was essentially an assassination on Dr. Umar Johnson's character to strive to criticize him and to expose him for not having the proper credentials in regards to what it is that he stands upon. Now, there's other things that Dr. Umar Johnson have done in the past, whatever, and if you've looked at my channel, I've spoken on those type of instances that I didn't think were fair, but I also didn't think that the way this interview was set up was fair at all, because you had two panelists that were primarily attacking Dr. Umar Johnson, and then Roland Martin is sitting back acting like he's neutral, but you could tell that he set that type of stage to begin with, and to strive to create the type of drama that we don't need as a people, especially in a public forum where you have the majority of people who are looking at this who don't have a vested interest in our well-being as a people to begin with. One of the other things that I think it's important to keep in mind is I think that this interview really exposed just how conservative Roland Martin actually is. And I think some people give him a little bit too much credit in terms of being liberal and being socially, economically conscious and, sharp when it comes to the way that the justice system operates. When you put him in an environment where a person that is as African-centric and nationalistic as Dr. Umar Johnson is interacting with him, you really get to see how conservative a person like Roland Martin really is, and those who actually support Roland Martin wholeheartedly. And I think that sometimes people have this perspective in terms of black people or African-centered people or whatever, that we're some monolith, that we are some group that all share the same perspectives and opinions about life, when that's not true. You have people who are that polarized as a Roland Martin and Dr. Umar Johnson. And we have a lot of those various different perspectives in our own families, but I think that having those type of discussions are best suited behind closed doors, or in a forum where we can truly assess those perspectives, as opposed to it being in a public forum where oftentimes it comes across as airing out our dirty laundry, So, there were many things to be learned from that interview. And, some of the things that, like I said, are sometimes when you put certain people in an environment, you really get an opportunity to see perspectives of them that you may have not seen under other circumstances. So, for example, when you saw Roland Martin interviewing Richard Spencer, the alt-right, he looked a certain type of way. But you took that same person that came across as very liberal and socially, economically conscious and all of this other stuff in a room with a Dr. Umar Johnson, he looks very, very conservative. So it's important, I think, for us to be able to get all of those different perspectives when it comes to where we stand. And I think the best way to get those perspectives is behind closed doors, not necessarily in a public forum where everything that we're saying and how we are engaging one another can easily be looked at as antagonism, or to be used as an opportunity of divide and conquer. So I will that this was inspiring, it was empowering, it was educational. It just gave those of you some of my perspectives on what I thought about that interview. So, peace.